Hello, student. So this is our last day on ancient Greek love magic, and it's a tour de force of a book, and we have some really interesting conclusions to come to. So let's get right to it. There are going to be four topics here that we really address in Pharaone. The first is a historical development of agoge spells, those spells that attract usually a woman by a man from a far distance, afflicting her with eros. So there's a shift in agoge spells where they're associated in the early Greek context with the goddess Aphrodite. Over time, we see that agoge spells are associated with the goddess of the moon, Selene, or the goddess of witchcraft, Hecate. Also, we see an association of agoge magic with chthonic deities, the deities of the Greek underworld. We'll also see some exceptions to the gender rules that we found in magic taxonomy. Namely, we will see some women using eros spells against men. Pharaone is then going to put forth a really interesting argument about how the victims could also be constructed as desiring subjects. In this way, women who are usually supposed to always be chaste are seen as being active and lusty. So they actually have a sense of, there's a way to say that this depicts them as having sort of sexual agency, even if it's, justified through erotic magic. And so there's, in this desiring subject and female sexual agency, we see an inversion of usual gender dynamics. And finally, we're going to go over Pharaone's general closing argument about the nature of these spells. So let's get started. Who is Aphrodite? Aphrodite is the Greek goddess of love and sexuality, and she was the main source and force that was yoked to love magic. Remember, we talked about in love magic, you'll have three elements. You'll have a victim, you'll have a statement of the result, namely that it's creating eros, and finally, some sort of junction to a non-human power, be that a deity or the very power of the ritual and the words themselves. So moving into the Hellenistic phases, now remember, the Hellenic world is just the Greek world, Hellenistic Greek-speaking world of the Mediterranean. We see that Selene, the goddess of the moon, and Hecate, the goddess of magic, the moon, and witchcraft, also the moon, become associated with agoge spells. Also, we might remember Hecate as being associated with the witches of Thessaly. We keep hearing about these witches of Thessaly. They're always up to some sort of business. So further after these goddesses, we see yet another shift toward underworld deities. These are called chthonic gods. Now, a chthonic god is a god of the underworld, and they're contrasted with what we call the Olympic gods, the gods in the sky. So they're groundly beings. I know in some contexts they're described as, they like libations poured on the ground. They like blood sacrifices. They like, they're just sort of a more visceral type of deity, the chthonic deities. All right, so Aphrodite sort of makes sense associated with eros magic because she's associated with sexuality and love. So subsequently, we see that she is associated explicitly with the Iunc spells and the Kestos Hemos, which we remember the Kestos Hemos was that magical bracelet of some form that was originally connected to Aphrodite using it. She's also associated with the enchanted apples that we see so often. And what's curious to me is that she doesn't exactly do these things or cause the eros, but she gives people the methodology to cause the eros. So sort of like the god Hephaestus of the hearth and of the forge. He is one who makes weaponry and makes things for the other gods. She creates these technologies. We do know that she is associated with the morning star and with the planet Venus. Now, another thing that we've seen in these spells is a shift from sort of DIY performances that were done on rooftops or whatnot to sometimes professional sorcerers working with clients. But we also see that the setting changes so that they're often done at night and they're often done at grave sites. This is, again, really similar to cursing magic. Those curse tablets were often found at grave sites. So the night the moon, the underworld, grave sites. All of these are better suited for the goddess of the moon, the goddess of witchcraft, and the underworld deities than they are to celestial Aphrodite. She makes these deities make more sense there when you really think about it. We do see some earlier references to Selene and Hecate being associated with love magic, but they're very sparse and hard to find. So one of the things that I want you to think about here are sort of gender poles. I mean, women invoking the moon to do the works of desire. I mean, there are some traces we found of men being men, when they use erotic magic, will invoke the sun or Helios. And there are patterns that we see across magic and across religious traditions. Namely, you see that the sun, is connected to the phallic, and the lunar, the moon, is connected to the yonic, the opposite of phallic, from the Sanskrit word yoni, meaning vulva. So we do actually, in Pharaoni digs out one homosexual-oriented spell, so male inflicting on another male who desires him, in association with invoking the sun. What's this business of invoking? And what is evoking? What are those two words? Well, let's take just a second here and think about the difference between prayers and spells, about what it means to pray to a deity or to conjure a deity up and force them to do something, or to conjure a deity up to enliven a spell. So as opposed to asking them in a prayer or supplicating them in a prayer, you're kind of manipulating them in magic. So how are different deities connected to magic? Well, Pharaoni says that a lot of these are more of what are called evocations. I'll explain that in a second. But he does say there is a chance that there might have been very pleasant prayers to these deities while a sorcerer is performing the tasks of preparing the magic spell, of mixing up the medicine, if you will. So what I want to think about is, what does it mean to invoke a deity? And what does it mean to evoke a deity? What does it mean to invoke a deity in prayer versus to evoke a deity in ritual? When we go to the Oxford English Dictionary, as I always go, I see that an invocation is like a prayer. It's the act of invoking or calling upon a god or a deity and so forth in the form of a prayer or an attestation, a supplication, or an act or form of supplication for aid or protection. You are asking. You are a lesser being than God, and you're asking. So we see in ecclesiastical forms that an invocation is a form of invoking prayer as part of a religious service. So I invoke the name of Jesus Christ and God the Father over these proceedings. Now, evocation is a little different. Evocation, we see the act or an act of conjuring or summoning a devil or spirit by incantation. An incantation or magical formula used for this or a similar purpose, a charm or a spell. So evoking is bringing forth that deity to have them do something. In Roman history, we see that an evocation was calling upon the gods of a besieged city to forsake it and come over to the besiegers. So the gods are evoked, brought forward, and convinced to come over to the side of the people who are holding an army hostage. We also see the evoking or the calling up of a spirit. And I will note that these words get a little tricky because I hear often, especially in context of ceremonial magic, people will say, invoke often. They will, when they are invoking something, as I've done with pals of mine, you are actually calling forth a creature or a something, a non-human entity. And usually in the contemporary context, you will invoke that deity and it's thought to be there, and you'll see some change, some physical change you'll notice. And then a lot of people, after they invoke a deity, will engage in automatic writing. So they'll just write, and let it all go. And the idea is that that deity can speak through them, or that they can have conversations in their own heads with these entities once they were invoked. We'll get more to that later.